Good morning. I hope everyone's ready for this last class period before break. I hope everyone is looking forward to a good break, and I hope that everybody is enjoying this novel as well. Let's get on with some of the basics, shall we? First of all, several of you have asked about all of the things that we're going to be talking about and where things are going to go after break. And I can't get everything on one slide, but I do want to get some of the basics on this slide and the next one, I think. Today, obviously, Group B is in class, or excuse me, today, obviously, Group A is in class. It's the 31st. When we get back, it'll be Group B, and then it'll be Group A again on that Friday. We'll be going back to B and A, and then Writing Lab C, Melissa, Morgan, Brady, and Josh will be on the 16th. I will probably ask people to do a daily writing that involves one paragraph or so from their book review and put it in the folder, and I'll try to make some comments about that before the book review itself is due. A couple other things about due dates. The quiz over Ordinary Grace it will be the 19th. The paper over Ordinary Grace will be the 21st. And then the quiz over Trail of Lightning will be May 7th. I'm still a little undecided about when the paper will be. It might be Saturday the 8th, or it might be Monday the 10th. But either way, those are the big assignments. There'll be one more in-class writing over Trail of Lightning, working with in-text citations and a few things like that. What you see on the slide is a preview about Let's All Go to the Lobby, and it struck me that as we're going through this in the 1950s feel, I might as well have a slide or a remembrance from the 1950s film on here and a talk about that was then, the nostalgia, the coming of age story with the comedy, coming of age story with the truth. The other thing that happened in the 50s, in addition to previews and in addition to little ditties that reminded people to go to the lobby, and by the way, I'll put a link for the Let's All Go to the Lobby videos in the description box if you want to take a look at it. In addition to the preview of coming attractions that we still have, many of the movies in the 1950s would have had a serial. A serial is a series of short films that kind of continued on and ended in a cliffhanger. The serial we've had throughout this whole class is character, conflict, connection, and theme. And with character, we have talked about direct and indirect. So in today's presentation, I'm going to talk about what's in the preview, and I'm also going to continue talking about characterization, both direct and indirect. As far as characterization goes, we've got Doyle, we've got Gus, we've got Ruth. We've talked about these characters before. We're going to take a few minutes developing them through the text, and then we're going to talk about the character Emil Brandt. Doyle, I think, has a lot of qualities that we're not necessarily going to like. Included in those qualities are the fact that he's conceited. He wasn't affected by the war. We can talk about the fact that he, is conceited. I know things because I listen to gossip. That listening to gossip also means that in a small town, he is connected. He does as much gossiping as he does listening. There's a cruel streak. Blowing up that frog with the M80 was unnecessary. He's sneaky. They see him coming out of Warren Redstone's lean-to. And when we start putting him into context, I think we have to look at his friend Gus. And Gus on page 97 gives us, he's a certain kind of man. In other words, look, he's somebody you should be wary of. He's not a bad man. And then there's a qualifier, really, but he's an unthinking man. He's a guy who maybe does stuff without thinking through the ramifications of everything that happens. And so we know that when he's coming out of Warren Redstone's lean to, he's probably not there for the good of Warren Redstone. We know that the gossip he trades in is not the happy sort of gossip. It's the kind of gossip that he's going to get information that he can use against people. All right? Because he's conceited and he wants to have some sense of control, and he has a bit of a cruel streak. So when we're starting to deal with Doyle, I think we have to contrast him as a voice of experience compared to the innocence that we have in Frank, that we have in Jake, that we think we might have in a minister, although we saw in last class that Nathan knows more than people think he does. With Gus, there's a loyalty. When he was drunk, he called Nathan a son of a bitch. But in public, he's going to be loyal. The captain was a damn fine officer. Also, there's a sense of adulthood in Gus. Even though he acts like a child, even though he lives in the church basement, even though he lives on odd jobs, even though he acts like a teenager. I let you down today. He's able to admit he's wrong. I have some responsibility for you. He wants to take that responsibility. That is a much more mature way of looking at things than you're ever going to find when you're dealing with Doyle. And also, unlike Doyle, who is ironically claiming to be connected and know things, he lacks an awareness of self. Gus has that awareness. I'm not the most forward-thinking person, and I've got my own devils to deal with. He is someplace that you can't get, Doyle to ever go. And so as we look at these characters, we're starting, I think, to develop a way of appreciating Gus and a way of distrusting Doyle. And then there's Ruth. We had her in her Ayn Rand phrase earlier, and we now see her in her social element. And we're dealing with a woman she didn't like, Julia Brandt. Julia comes up and Julia, digs at her, disses her, whatever you want to call it. You and Emil have always been close. I remember when we all thought you might marry. That's a little dig. But a couple of sentences later, she digs back at Julia. Those worry lines on your face. In other words, she's going to give as good as she can get. She is going to be sharp-tongued. We saw that sharp tongue dealing with Nathan. I didn't sign on to be a minister's wife. And now we see it employed in her own defense when somebody comes after her. And so now we start getting a feeling of who and what Ruth is as somebody who's a force to be reckoned with, who doesn't back down from anyone, and who will use her wit to make sure that she remains the equal of everyone, even though she is only, in scare quotes, a minister's wife, not high in the social standing the way she was, but she can still give as good as she gets. And then we have Emil Brandt. There's a bit of weakness, or weakness might be the wrong word, but we wonder why there's the suicide attempt. At the same time, we have a world-weary thing. Who can say where greatness comes from? It depends on God, it depends on fate, it depends on chance, it depends on luck. He's kind of a guy who's been beaten up a little bit. But he's also kind of got, no one can be happy all the time. Wish for wisdom, a virtue that's not so fickle. In other words, want the true best, not happiness, not giddiness, but the idea of wisdom. And please, please, please remember that I think anytime you have literature and we start contrasting wisdom with happiness, please remember that in literature, from Norse mythology, from almost every place, there's this idea that wisdom comes with cost. And so he has paid the price, he has paid the cost. Wisdom comes with this cost. And I think it's important here to understand what he is dealing with as he deals with his ideas of, don't be fickle. And then I think the next thing to take a quick look at is small town life. For some of you, this I think is just obvious. There is no way to escape the small town. And on page 131, we have the priest and the Methodist minister sitting down on the front porch having a conversation. And the priest talking about the gossip. She drinks. She smokes cigarettes. And again, you have to remember that in the early 1960s, there was this double standard. Everybody smoked, but only the men smoked out in public. If a woman smoked, she kind of had to be in the house. We weren't going to have women smoking outside. And I remember that being a big conversation with my mother and a couple of others about all these women who were kind of brazen and smoked outside. And I was just a little kid in, 63, 64. But then worst of all, she shuns the activities of the Women's Society of Christian Service. Please remember that small town pastors, they, go visit the sick, they preach their sermon. Some of them may had to, work on fixing up the parsonage, work on fixing the church. Building itself, that might be part of the job. But the wife also had to do some duties. And one of those duties was to take care of some of the women's groups. And Ruth wasn't all about that. And so small town gossip is going to grind and grind and grind as we deal with Ruth not doing the expected things. We've already seen she was complicated. We've already, with the Ayn Rand stuff, we've already seen that she didn't sign on to be a minister's wife. This would be one of the things she didn't sign on for. So please remember that one of the things that happens here are there are tons of layers. We're talking about the small town, but we're also adding a layer to the characterization of Ruth. And then I think there's some comedy. All right. Young Jake wants Frank to put the Playboy back. Frank doesn't want to put the Playboy back because it's a Playboy magazine. It's the ultimate adult thing in the 1960s. There's the idea of joy that they bested Morris Engdahl, and the fact that he was blessedly stupid. And then he talks about the first kiss, but then he does this line about she looked like Groucho Marx. Groucho Marx is the person you see on the picture. He was one of the famous Marx brothers. He was the one who had all the double entendre, and he had a game show later on in the late 50s, early 60s. But the fact of the matter is, I think it's important to understand that all of these pop culture references that are in the book, sometimes they're going to make sense for older readers. People like you may not know who Groucho Marx is. So I thought I would throw that picture up there to just kind of let you know. But here on the coming of age thing, these are all laughs. These are all things that people kind of look back on and laugh and would kind of remember similar sorts of situations. Okay? He's starting to grow up. He's got this naive belief that, in America, people don't go and get thrown in jail just for being troublemakers. When in fact, a lot of people get thrown in jail just for being troublemakers. The idea of you love each other, you get married, that's how it works, is again naive. He's trying to be serious here, but it reveals a lot of naivete that is going to get exposed, and it's things like these statements that we're going to see Frank having to grapple with throughout the book, and we're going to see Frank understand that perhaps people do get thrown in jail for being troublemakers. He's going to understand that love and marriage are never simple, and he's going to have to grow up throughout the course of this novel with his attitudes about the United States, with his attitudes about love and marriage, or with his attitudes about criminal behavior. And then there's coming of age, dealing with the truth. I was always tempted to put in the slide of Colonel Jessup from the movie A Few Good Men with the guy screaming, "You can't handle the truth." But he has to deal with, she's probably sleeping with Carl Brandt. He's got to have a tough time dealing with that. He's got things that he has seen that he can't unsee. And he's got a tough time dealing with that. And he's got to deal with this idea of there are people who are virtuous and there are people of low virtue. Somebody's accused his sister of being a woman of low virtue. And how does he deal with that? And then how does he deal with his feelings toward seeing a topless woman for the first time? He's got to deal with the truth. And again, in the words of Colonel Jessup, he's having a tough time handling the truth. And then he learns the final truths. Remember, he talked about you don't get thrown in jail for being a troublemaker. He learns about a massacre of Native Americans. He learns that it isn't always easy to fall in love and get married. We'll find out reasons for that as the book goes on. But there's going to be things that he has learned, and the truth is going to start weighing on him. All right. Very simple. We've tried to go through character. We've tried to go through conflict. We've tried to go through theme. Today, I think I spent most of the time dealing with character, whether it was Frank's coming of age, whether it was Gus, whether it was Doyle, whether it was Ruth. All of those things, I think we're dealing with character. So think about it. Which character do you find most interesting so far? Explain why. Give me 4 or 5 good lines. Hope everybody has a great Easter break, and we'll start seeing people again when we come back next week.